All right, please have a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Is Sharon not coming?
She's not, so Kathy is
Oh,
taking
you got minutes?
all the
Okay.
meetings. Had something come up.
All right, thanks. Need a motion to recess in executive session?
Motion to recess into executive session for the purpose of discussing legal matters, personnel, and real estate.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Kathy, please close roll call. Thank you. All right.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, nobody wants to make a public comment.
Moving on right away.
Crickets. Okay. John, board calendar.
Board calendar. One of the things I kind of reached out to you is to bring your calendars to try and schedule the June retreat. We kind of had delayed it a little bit pending the board reorganization and everything. And so we have the June 10th date, the Monday down, but wanted to come up with another date that worked best for the retreat. I know that people seem to prefer a Saturday morning, or it's more relaxed following maybe than an evening meeting, but I certainly wanted to throw that out there for the group's consideration. The only day I can't make is June 15th, but
What date did you propose? June 8th?
I originally, the one that worked best for board members when I asked was the 29th, but since you had a wedding now, David is unable to be there, and I don't have the sheet where I was keeping track of everybody's other best preferred dates.
The 8th is the MSBA Leadership Summit.
Yeah, and I think at least somebody did sign up to attend that.
I was going to, I did it.
Yeah, I think I did.
Yeah.
Are you going to do your training?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
That's the 8th, that's not the 1st.
Well, they're doing training that as well then, are they?
The Friday is training, and then Saturday is the,
Oh, okay, cool.
yeah.
What about the first?
I come out on the first.
Okay.
You're not free on the 1st, you said?
Huh?
You're not free on the 1st?
I'm not first.
Okay, all right.
I don't think we're gonna hit, the 29th had been the only Saturday where everybody could make it. So I think doing a Saturday is probably not gonna work unless people's schedules change. Well, now we're also with David too, and we're fine, I mean,
No, you're important.
we just
How much
wanna
more
go.
productive would
We
be when
wanna-
either of us were there?
Do we wanna stay on a Saturday, or?
Did we
So
say the
what's
20, was
the-
the 22nd out?
June 22nd is a Saturday. I mean, it works for me personally, but I know somebody couldn't make it at one point. June 22nd.
I cannot do it on June 1st, but I think that's my only June.
And Alex, this would sort of be until about midday.
Okay.
So it's just the morning.
Joe, how about you?
I think I'm okay.
You can do the 22nd, Christine 22nd,
Yeah, we're good.
okay.
No, I'm just I'm trying to find it. I'm looking to see.
Remind me, what's the main agenda topic?
Talking about strategic planning, just all the transitions and everything with the bond issue stuff. Yeah.
Can we do redistricting as well?
It works?
You
Yeah, I
go.
guess so. I
Okay.
can't, yeah.
22nd. Okay. All right, that's good. Send you an
I'm not
invite.
going to put that on.
That's up here, that's here, right?
You can do it here?
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll start at 8:30, is that okay?
Yep.
The other one is just an FYI that on the 13th of May, we'll be at the Service Center. And the board meeting will be, and the purpose is so we can have all the science fair things on display. We, the leadership team, Arnold met with us to made the decision to push back the start of the board meeting until 7. We'll start with regular session then, we'll do executive after, and we'll do a science fair kind of meeting at from 6:30 to 7. Sound good?
May 13th.
Yes, ma'am.
I got that already.
That's
There
it.
will be an executive session at the end.
Yes,
Yes.
if needed.
Yes. Okay, that's it for that. Policy, what I put in front of you, or what you have, is a single policy. So last time around, I had put the policy, I put the language in the board docs, but I forgot to include the attachment. So I gave it a first read again, so you're seeing it, maybe seeing it for the second time, but since I didn't include the attachment, I put it in as a first read. So you'll get a chance to approve that policy at the next meeting, the May 13th. That's that.
Okay.
Superintendent update, let me get my stuff here together. We will celebrate our National Honors folks at the next meeting. I wanted to give a shout out to them and everybody who got those celebrations, but when Jessica and Patrick are here. Kathy V is going to give a brief update regarding next year's 150th anniversary. Kathy has been kind of working behind the scenes when she wasn't doing Prop E stuff, which was a bulk of her time with Pat to kind of get some ideas down. And you want to share, Kathy? Do you mind coming to the mic so those at home could hear?
Right. You have probably seen that our district was founded in 1868, but that was when the people came together and decided to have a school district. But it took them a year to get the boundaries and all that kind of stuff finished. So really, when school classrooms opened was 1869, and that would be this fall, 150th anniversary. So we knew that was coming up, and a group of us, including the alumni people and some people at central office, have been thinking about this as we were doing Prop E work, and have come up with several things that we might do. We haven't made any decisions, but we've just got kind of a list, and I'll read a few of them. A lot of them are existing events that we could tie our anniversary celebration into. There's the July 4th parade, and I think we've already made arrangements or looked into whether we could have a bus with a banner on it and kids from different schools and grades on the bus. The back to school barbecue is a good opportunity. We could invite alumni to join us for that. Run for Webster would be able to also recognize that. Turkey Day, there are a lot of things we could do for that. We could brainstorm where our logo could grow. And by the way, Andy Throme at the high school and some of his students are working on a logo type that we can start putting out there. MLK, Martin Luther King Day event, because the first public school in Webster Groves was for African American children, preceded the establishment of the district. Webster Reads, we could have schools celebrate the 150th day of school, the way they celebrate the 100th day. Marching band could form a 150 at perhaps their first home game. I've been in touch with the mayor of Webster, who would be happy to have a proclamation congratulating us and also determine a day that would be Webster Groves School District Day in Webster Groves, and I'm fairly certain all the 4 other communities would do the same for us. And then there's other things like slideshows, having alumni from different decades submit reminiscences that we could post online, sell shirts, a paint by numbers mural in a public space, community picnic and power potluck at the end of the year where everybody could come together, maybe at Mossfield, etc. So those are just some ideas we've been tossing around, and Steve Lohr has agreed to lead this group, and we will keep you informed. So all suggestions are welcome. If anybody wants to join us, that would be lovely too. But I think we've got to start.
It's going to be good, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy.
Some of the work in terms of strategic planning, starting off, and I won't beat a dead horse because I've shared this before, but starting off with the development of a portrait of a graduate, which purpose is to clarify our school community's visions for its young people upon graduation and lead up to. Having some kind of desirable outcomes, what we want for children when they leave us will help inform kind of what we do and how we help develop them along the way through their whole path throughout our system. Allow us to move more strategically towards those. What we decided to do instead of starting from scratch and feeling pretty good about it is the high school had a process where they developed a portrait of a graduate and worked with students and parents and community and different people to develop a portrait. So we're kind of starting from that and asking different groups, and then ultimately, like schools and something, will go out to all families in terms of what you want for kids upon graduation. We did our first one with the EIE, Equity and Ed Committee, this past week. We'll do CCC coming up. So there are some ready-made groups that are valuable contributors, but we'll open it up. The intent is to have to you guys by June 10th that portrait of a graduate. And again, they're like macro type skills that will then, through strategic planning and alignment of our district, will have obviously micro strategies to try and get to them. What are going to be the measurable outcomes, and how are we going to work towards those particular things? So the look is, and we'll to the January in June come to you with some thinking through the work of the portrait of the graduate, thinking around some of the goals of the board, my goals, have just some tentative draft goals for your consideration along with measurable outcomes at that June meeting. Once we get what our goals are, what those outcomes are, then we'll bring together people to develop the strategies that will then come back for you for presentation when we start school. Either that August date or the first September date. Excited about that. Just mentioning the carnival. It's on the consent agenda once again. Looking forward to partnering with the Lions and the city to host the carnival. Bruce is going to stay on for another year as a CFO. We're all very excited about that. I think the community will be, I know the community will be excited about that. He'll be in a reduced capacity, 2 days a week. We have posted for a COO position, whose purpose will be to handle the operations side of the school district and learn under Bruce's tutelage everything as it relates to the school district and school finance. We're trying to attract people that have the skill set, capabilities, and experiences with both the operation and finance side. But again, we're blessed that Bruce will stay on for as long as it takes in order to ensure successful transition in that role. Legislation, just for you, just to be aware of, we had our district has continued to kind of take the lead with the legislative advocacy group. I appreciate Alex has been there multiple times. Just some of the highlights from our latest meeting. It's looking really good that the foundation formula is going to be fully funded. Both the House and the Senate have it in their budgets. The governor came out of the gate supporting full funding. Bruce, that would estimate changes the adequacy target by about $70.
Right. Compared to what we have in the budget, a little bit less, 60 to 70.
Yeah. So it's pretty significant, $70 per student in our school district. So we'll wait and see until that gets decided. Transportation, they're going to add a little bit to transportation. Transportation doesn't affect us, so we don't have a lot of transportation, but it's grossly underfunded across the state. So they're going to add a little bit to it, about $10 million increase, but so we try to do what we can to advocate for transportation across the state. Charter school expansion, right now it's not looking like there's overly strong support, at least the majority for that. We have a lot of people, Dr. Riss is one of them, the people at Massa, a number of superintendents go down, Ed Plus, Paul Ziegler goes down to advocate on behalf of public schools. So we continue to keep our eye on both the charters and the vouchers. Again, with charters, the big thing for us is we've talked about, it's just having, if we have charters, having the same level of accountability as public school systems. The public school dollar, the public's dollars, they should have the same system of accountability that public schools do. I will say that the latest bill, which is different, the latest derivation, is that it doesn't have students being able to attend a charter school in a different school district. So the first one, earlier variations allowed for open enrollment. So our tax dollars, our adequacy target would go to Kirkwood for our student who want to leave and go to a charter school. The latest version of it, they could only use that money to go to a charter school within Webster Groves. That stuff changes quite a bit, so keep an eye on it. For the voucher side, they're looking at vouchers that would pay your state adequacy target, essentially for us a little over $6,000 for students to go to private and parochial schools. Some of the worry or some of the criticisms of that is that there aren't many private school parochial schools that you can get for $6,000. And so they will speak like it's creating equity of opportunities, competition yields better products, but there's still the belief that there's going to be a huge access gap with that being the overall amount. So we continue to stay in tune with that. School start date, there's a bill that's moving forward at this point. There's 2 bills that have been filed that we could not start school any earlier than, this said 14 days, but they moved it to 10 days before Labor Day. There's the feeling that, there's not the feeling, that this is really Branson driven and just the economy in Branson. College students that go back to college, people that don't go on vacations. So I'm not necessarily in favor of it just due to the loss of local control. We should be able to set when our school starts and when our school ends. But that is moving forward at this point. There's a House joint resolution. I learned that House joint resolutions come from committees and that they ultimately go on a ballot for voters to approve. Never knew that. A lot of people didn't know that in the room. One is that we would have to have all tax increase elections, bond and tax levy must be held in the general election in an even number of years in November. And so we talked about at that meeting pros and cons of that. And the other one is preventing the use of any district resources to communicate with legislators. So we could not communicate using our computers, our phones, our cell phones, anything, email with legislators. Alex, you want to add anything from that meeting? You were there, anything? There's a few other things, but I didn't mention them all.
There was also the House committee bill about moving board elections to
Thank you.
to November,
Yeah.
to big election cycles as well,
Yeah.
which is it just seems interesting. It seemed like there are quite a few that are targeting, school education, moving those elections as opposed to, city council or, anything else. I feel like there was one other topic about that was kind of brought forth by the charter school group about students who, let's see, wasn't it something around giving students who needed the ability to get credit or something like that, giving them the ability to get the credit, but there's something faulty. Do you remember that one at all?
It was part of a reading intervention bill that would restrict how schools intervened in support of kids. It would very much narrow and control how schools would intervene.
Okay.
Which of course we're not crazy about either. Yeah, thank you.
What's the logic behind that? Why would you want to do that?
I don't remember. Chris, jump in. Jump in.
From what we heard, that there's a contingent of people who are very, very much support a certain method of literacy instruction, and literacy intervention. And so they happen to have some inroads with some legislators and have their ear. And so because of that, they don't feel that schools should have really a say in how students are interviewed. So they feel it's called structured literacy, so that they feel that that's what should be taught regardless of the needs of students.
What's it called again?
Structured literacy. It's one of those situations that often gets, it's all in language. So some, I don't want to broad generalization, but some maybe misunderstand what guided literacy or balanced literacy means. And so it's all in how you interpret things.
The only other one that I remember that I wanted to bring up was the House Bill 572, which is a mandatory hunter safety class across, all the districts in the state. And I think that one was interesting because it had the backing of, was it like medical professionals?
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Mandatory hunting.
Hunter safety.
Hunter safety.
Don't you already have to take a course to get your hunting license? But they want it taught in school?
They want it taught in
taught
schools.
Every school?
Every school.
Every day.
Who's this?
Thank you.
Last thing wanted to share with you, thanks Alex, wanted to share with you that in meeting with Patrick, and we said this, we talked about this briefly at one meeting, really brief, a couple months ago, I think 2 or 3 months ago, but we're going to put out a survey and talk about the location of Webster Groves High School's graduation. Do you need another one?
Yes, please.
Sorry. And so the students, Patrick and Jessica, we've heard from a lot of students. We haven't asked all of them, but we've heard a lot of students that they feel they're getting I don't know what the most appropriate word is, but a raw deal by not going to one of the fancier, like the Chaffetz Arena type things for their graduation. Last year we experienced, it was pretty rough when we had to come inside due to the weather, and we had parents, grandparents, other relatives that didn't get to see their students walk across the stage.
In person.
In person.
Yes.
Thank you. So some people got to see it live on YouTube. If you didn't know how to use YouTube, you just heard about it. I know at least one person. So what this would do is we're just going to get reaction from current students and families, what their thoughts would be on a relocation, along with what would be most important to them if we were to move off-site. We threw on there just what their thoughts were related to the Friday before Memorial Day weekend. We'll make sure Friday's capitalized on number 4. And ultimately, we come back to the board if this is something we want to explore. Dr. Schritt.
On 3, are you just wanting one response there? Because I could see how multiple
you're
responses
right.
could be, or maybe that they would rank them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rank it, yeah. That'd be a good idea.
Perhaps rank up to 3.
Because I could see number of tickets, parking, and accessibility, and location,
They're all important, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even if you just rank all of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about having ADA accessibility. I'm not sure that's optional. I mean, can we choose a location that isn't ADA? I don't think
Thank you.
we can or should.
Thank you. We struggle at our current site with the parents the people who come in wheelchairs, have wheelchairs, they're placed, pretty far away.
How about if you put visibility for family members?
That's good. Thank you.
So this is for May 2020, meaning that the May 2020 date could change?
Yes.
When's the latest by which you would decide this?
May. May or June, yeah. Yeah, we know people are already thinking, you may already have a place.
No.
But people are coming in and,
Maybe people who are more.
yeah. Yeah, by June at the latest. Quick. All right, that's it for me.
So the next item on the agenda that we had scheduled for Jessica to talk to us about equity in athletics, unfortunately neither, she could not, I can't remember.
Both of them
They
could
both,
not.
they both had
Something came
school
up.
issues, or not issues, obligations. And so because that was really their baby, we're gonna wait and reschedule that presentation until they can be here. So, moving right along to Mr. Elliman.
I'm going to wait for the applause to die down.
It's died down.
Thank you. Good evening and thank you. Albeit to an empty room tonight, we are pleased to present a draft of the preliminary 2019-20 district budget plan to the Board of Education and the community, although I should mark that out at this point. Before getting into the
It's
presentation...
recorded. People are going to be listening.
There'll be
Oh,
few
that's
people,
true.
but listen
That's
to
right.
us.
They don't need to come. They can listen to us, listen in on us. Before getting into the presentation, I'd like to first acknowledge the tireless efforts of our district comptroller, Joanne Kite, who is also here this evening and who not only assists with putting the budget... She and her husband just celebrated their 23rd anniversary. 24. You're working on 24 now.
Maybe.
This is recorded, Joanne.
I should have checked with her before I just answered that. Anyway, Joanne Kite, she's been here helping the district not only put the district budget together each year, but also with just day-to-day ongoing analysis and chasing down answers to financial variances and questions that I have, that board members have, community members have, principals have, and she's just the answer woman. The 2019-20 budget proposes to continue district class sizes, programs, and support services at their current levels, as well as provide what I would characterize as seed money for a few new initiatives, all within a balanced budget framework. The overall revenue and expenditure projections for the district was outlined in a fair degree of detail in your advanced materials provided to you and posted for public inspection. As there is not much more that can be added to that information, my remarks this evening may be somewhat brief, focusing on the most significant issues and factors and assuming that everyone has done their assigned budget review homework. Before getting into some of the budget numbers and the longer-term outlook, it might be helpful to put the overall budget development process into context. Okay, and to have a little fun as well. As human beings, we sometimes tend to overcomplicate things. Reminds me of the joke, usually Dr. Simpson flinches every time I say that, about how to put an elephant. Well, that's probably the competence. Like, I'm just going to pretend I don't hear it, and that's okay. How to put an elephant in the refrigerator. You simply open the door, put in the elephant, and close the door. Simple, right? Even Einstein would be proud. After all, as he observed, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Now that I'm thinking about it, though, too bad he's not still around because I'm a little fuzzy on his theory of relativity. But let's set that aside for now and get to work. The budget development process begins with setting goals. Class size targets, program service levels, staff compensation, and so on. A more complete list of such goals were outlined in your materials and the public posting. In addition, the district constantly monitors its finances, analyzing budget to actual results on a monthly basis, following state regional, local economic trends, and assessing internal school district factors such as student enrollment, class sizes, staff attrition, energy usage, and the like. All of this information is not only considered during the budget adjustment process as the current fiscal year unfolds, but is used in the annual budget development process for the upcoming year and even longer range projection update process. In other words, we don't just track trends, we analyze and act on those. And act on the trends. Or as one of my college professors used to say, you can't pull a rabbit out of a hat if there isn't one in there. So part of my job as Chief Financial Officer, therefore, is to either make sure there is a rabbit in the hat or make sure everyone knows there isn't. So the most logical starting point for any journey, regardless of where you're going or how you're going to get there, is your current position, or in this case, the current budget. So where are we? Well, let's look at how our current year-to-date budget numbers are tracking, and then we'll move into projections for next year. Subsequently, we will also take a peek at the longer range financial outlook for the district to include 2020 and 2020-21 and 21-22 fiscal years. So the year to date, we're looking really good in both the revenues and the expenditures. What I'm presenting here is looking at revenue, the major revenues, also total revenues. Our budget, as revised, $61.7 million. We've actually collected through the end of March 31st, so we're 9 months or 75% into the fiscal year. We've collected about $53.9 million. So overall, revenue-wise, we've collected 87% of the annual revenues, and that's more than 75% because the primary revenue source for the district being property taxes, the bulk of those are received in December and January. So depending on the time when you're looking at these during the year, that percentage can fluctuate very widely. And since it's the single largest revenue, about 2/3 of every dollar that the district receives comes from property taxes, it greatly influences the overall health of the district. And you can see we're well ahead of last year's pace through the end of March for property taxes. I would caution anyone to draw a conclusion that we might wind up the year well ahead of last year. If we looked at, and that's something that we look at as well, because all things being equal, we would have collected 75% of revenue, but all things aren't equal. Revenues aren't received equally throughout the fiscal year, just like expenditures don't always occur equally throughout the fiscal year. So to inform what those patterns and trends are, we look at what prior year trends have been. And last year, we closed out the year at 101.57% of budget. So we were within our goal of 2% of budget. And revenues for property taxes, we closed at 100%. So one might look at these numbers and say, well, we're about 93% collected through the end of March. Last year, we were 90% collected. We wound up the year at 100%. We're running 3% ahead. Maybe we'll wind up 3% ahead on property taxes. That won't be the case. Last year, at the end of March, we had a large amount of protested property taxes that hadn't been released to the district yet. The district always initiates it's called a friendly lawsuit for the release of those on behalf of not just Webster Grove School District, but all property taxing jurisdictions in St. Louis County. Those are released. We usually receive them in April or May. We're running on track for that again this year. And then that's the last significant collection that districts or taxing jurisdictions make from property taxes. That amount of protested taxes this year is much less than it was the year before. Kind of follows the reassessment cycle. Last year's collections were based on 2017 assessments, which was a reassessment year, leading to more appeals and more taxes paid under protest. 2018, which is the current fiscal year we're in, for 18-19, not a reassessment year. There weren't as many value appeals, and therefore not as many taxes paid under protest. When we look at the balance that is yet to be released to the school district, we expect to wind up property tax collections compared to budget within a few tenths of a percent of 100%. So we'll be very close to what last year's actual collections were when the dust settles. That's our expectation. State formula, this year we're running at 75, just a little over 75%. And that's pretty typical for the state formula and for Prop C, because those are more evenly paid on a month-by-month basis throughout the school year. So you can see those are running very close. We wound up last year a little over-collected compared to what the budget was because of the lawsuit and the interest that we collected as well on the district's litigation on the full-day kindergarten issue. That is not expected to repeat. That's not repeating this year. We expect that we'll wind up this year right on budget, within a few tenths of a percent of budget for both the formula and Prop C. So overall, we'll do a little better than budget, we believe. Maybe as much as 101% of budget overall, but we're going to be very close based on all the information we have right now. Expenditures, a similar story. When we look at year-to-date overall, we're at 64.5. Last year we were at 65.9, so we're a little behind last year's pace, which is a good thing when you're talking about expenditures, but almost all of that is in non-salary benefits. You can see our salary benefits, which closed the year at 99% of budget, so we were less than 1% off in terms of budget. We're within a tenth of a percent of where we were at the end of March last year, so we're going to be really close again. We should close out salaries and benefits at about 99% of the budget. The all other expenditures, we have the carryover. That's what's influencing the fluctuation in the all other expenditures, is the carryover funds from unspent facilities budgets, unspent building budgets get added into the budget, and we had a larger allocation in the facilities department that got carried over this year. Plus, we had budgeted more in this year's budget for our facilities projects, and those usually don't happen until toward the end of the school year. So I would have expected this all other expenditure category to be running behind last year. And when you look at a 5%, that might look like a big percentage, but when you look at what the budget is in that particular category, 5% of 15 million is not the same as 5% of 61 million. So it represents hundreds of thousands of dollars, which represents what the building budget, the facilities budget allocation was. So as we look at that cycle, we plan, we monitor, we analyze variances, and then we adjust our plans based on those. At this point, looking at how things are playing out this year, there's really not much that we need to adjust and replan for. I think our system and our process is working. So I think that it's important that to note, and that community should be reassured, that this kind of year-to-date look is part of a more detailed and rigorous actual versus budget analysis that is performed by the finance department every month on a line-by-line basis. We're looking at major categories here. Each of these categories have several lines that roll up into those categories. We look at it not just on an overall basis, but on a line-by-line basis, budget to actual, and it really serves as an early warning system should there be any major unexpected budget fluctuations during the year. And of course, that executive summary, that monthly analysis, is shared with the board and included in board materials so that the public can see those as well. So that's where that's where we are right now in this year, and moving on to where we are going. Budget development in Webster Grove School District is the product of deliberate analysis and rethinking that goes into programs and services that the budget is actually made up of, and that goes into how the district conducts its business. After all, when staffing, salary models, efficiency initiatives, revenue optimization, and other strategies are structured properly, the budget really then just reflects those approaches and those structures and speaks for itself. The preliminary 2019-20 district budget continues a sustainable, stable, no surprises philosophy. Similar to this year's year-to-date actual and budget versus budget results, the district's conservative budget outlook for future years also reveals a slight but gradual improvement over original budget projections. This type of slowly improving financial picture over the course of time should not be a cause for concern or alarm. It's really to be expected given the conservative assumptions on which the district bases its budget estimates, especially as those conservative estimates are compounded over a multiple year period. So as we look at kind of a snapshot of this year's budget and looking kind of at the bottom line, I tend to look at the operating revenues, operating expenses. The totals expenses includes bond sales and non-operating sources. The important thing on an ongoing basis is to make sure our operating budget is balanced. And this for 1920, we have a balanced budget, a slight $15,000 surplus projected. And as we really look at that, we maintain that balanced budget going in to 1920, thanks to the fact that 2019 is a reassessment year. Combined with the state legislators, as Dr. Simpson reported earlier, their commitment to strong education funding levels. As in previous projections, however, when we look out beyond 1920, a slow progression of deficits in succeeding years is indicated. This dynamic is primarily a function of two factors. First, it simply represents an ongoing and inherent structural imbalance between district revenue source growth and district expenditures that continue to financially challenge the district. We saw that 2/3 of every dollar comes from property taxes. We only get increases through new construction in property taxes, except for we get a CPI adjustment every other year. Since we're completely built out, we don't have a lot of new construction. It's not enough to keep up with inflation, and we only get an inflationary adjustment every other year. Yet our expenditures are subject to inflation every year, and it's that little bit of tension that causes the revenue and the expenditure ends to diverge when you're making conservative, especially when you're making conservative assumptions about each of those pieces. As we get closer to those future years, those two ends actually start to come closer together because we're not compounding those conservative assumptions as far into the future. As we approach those years and get closer to them, that variance starts to decline. We've seen that each year, and that's really just the nature of our budget process. So in spite of these financial challenges, the district has been able to maintain a balanced budget outlook through a combination of efficiency initiatives, good management, and a favorable economic environment, even while for 2019-20 adding 6.2 FTE in new staffing for elementary health and enrollment growth, Hickson Gifted and PE, and the new high school Thrive entrepreneurial program. In addition, the economy continues to strengthen, and the state legislature, so far at least, appears committed to fully funding the foundation formula for a third straight year. At the same time, district resident enrollment is projected to slowly trend upward in the coming years, which also tends to positively to increase state funding. The effect of those factors is evident through the 1920 budget numbers. Looking for a moment at just the 1920 year, we're projecting operating revenues of $62.9 million compared to 61.8, so we're up about $1.1, $1.2 million. And included in your materials was an analysis, kind of a line-by-line analysis of where that was coming from, with obviously the bulk of it coming from new construction and the CPI factor.
Bruce, do you want to talk about your state adequacy target right there? What you
Yeah,
have right there?
and that's a note here that even the budget as it's presented with a balanced budget, I had used $6,308 as the state adequacy target, which is this year's full funding level. I wasn't at the point that I was putting the preliminary numbers together. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to jump all the way to $6,375, which would be the full funding level for next year. So we had increased this from the 2018-19 school year. We used 6,280. I was expecting 6,308 preliminarily for next year, which would be full funding for this year. I had used 6,280, not increasing it to 6,308 because I wasn't sure that the state would actually fully fund it this year. We're still not sure that when the dust settles that that'll be the case, because as districts report their final ADA numbers for this school year, the state continues to make retroactive adjustments to the formula based on dividing up a fixed amount of dollars between all of the students that are reported in the state, and sometimes that can decrease after the fact, after the fiscal year is over. You can get prior year adjustments from the state because they have to divide it among more students than what they thought they would. In fact, this year's budget has over $100,000 of prior year adjustments for Webster Grove school districts, because last year's ADA, when districts reported their final numbers, turned out to be higher for last year than the state thought they were going to be. And so we have $100,000 of a prior period adjustment, a negative adjustment this year, but because we used 6,280 instead of 6,308, when we looked at where are we trending, how are our collections going, we're right on target, because that $100,000 prior year adjustment is exactly offset by getting $28 a student more through them fully funding the foundation formula compared to the budget. So you give a little on one hand, get a little on the other, and it all kind of levels out when the dust settles. But if in fact the state does come through with fully funding the foundation formula for 2019-20, we're using 6,308. Full funding would be 6,375. So that $67 difference per student, when you're talking about 4,000 kids, it's over $200,000 per year, because that's in the foundation formula is an ongoing funding source. So when we looked at before in the budget summary, and we were looking at a $575,000 deficit in year 2 and $1 million deficit in year 3, that 575 would become 375, let's say, and the $1,088,000 would become 888, something like that, if the state really comes through with full funding and then maintains it into the future. We will bump up the foundation formula for the June final budget presentation. I don't know if I'll boost it all the way up to 6,375. Maybe we'll boost it to 6,350 or so to allow for a possible prior year adjustment for this year that would offset that as well. But the good news is we don't need to reflect all of that, because we already have a balanced budget for next year, and that would by putting that into it, it would just increase the surplus, and at this point the district doesn't really need those funds for the current fiscal year. But looking forward, as deficits begin to appear, we will need those surpluses to help offset. So in any event, it's important to know, to just keep in mind that the nearly inevitable eventuality of budget deficits has been planned for, projected and planned for some time, and is one of the specific reasons that the district has built and maintained a surplus operating reserve. When you look at the operating reserve at bottom line here, you can see that in 14-15, the district's operating reserves were at $18 million. We've built those up through this year, projecting to close this year at about $26 million. So we've increased those reserves by about $8 million over the past 4 years. And what's needed for district cash flow purposes is around $17 million. So we have $8 or $9 million of reserve balances that are in addition to what the district needs for annual cash flow purposes during the year. A few million of those are due to dedicated, of those reserve balances are dedicated to specific programs like food service, the adventure club, preschool, that aren't really available. They're dedicated to those specific programs and they aren't available for the district to use for other kinds of operations. They have to be used for in the programs that generated them. So if we set aside a couple of million for that, that still leaves the district with $6 million of available operating reserves. And if you recall, when we were talking about the bond issue and trying to figure out how we could get the district bonding capacity to a level that would cover all of the safety, accessibility, and building addition needs that the district had. And when we initially looked at that, we were projecting $13 million. And then when we looked at leveraging some of our extra operating fund balances by transferring them into the debt service fund to cover the debt service fund cash flow, we were able to leverage that $3 million into $9 million and get up from 13 million to the 22 million. Hopefully you kind of remember that dialogue. The good news is with reassessment this year, the increase in the district's tax base due to reassessment was much greater than expected and much greater than what had been used in the projection of the district's bonding capacity. In fact, it was enough higher of that now that we've rerun those bonding capacity projections based on the reassessment figures that were provided to the district, it now appears that the district will not need to transfer any of the $3 million over to the debt service fund or to restrict those funds for that potential future use. That increase, and that is even assuming that taxpayers appeal some of those values and that some of those values get reduced. The reassessment resulted in about an 18% increase in the district's property values. We're using 15% of that 18% in our bond issue, our cash flow projections for debt service, and just using that 15% instead of 18%. That 3% differential may not sound like much, but given that our tax base has grown to over $900 million, 3% represents almost $30 million of property value reductions that could be given upon appeal. We don't think they'll be that great, but we're being conservative. We're using 15%. We have, that gives the debt service fund enough cash flow to do a couple of things. One is support itself even with the new $22 million bond issue without a $3 million transfer. Secondly, the district had been looking at and included in the preliminary budget that you were looking at. If you looked at line 96, building improvements, you had seen a footnote there that we had included $600,000 in that line item for the operating fund contribution to supplement the $22 million of bond issue in order to cover the $22.6 million of projects that we had identified needed to be done. Given the cash flow that is possible in the debt service fund is projected for that with the new assessed valuation, we would be able to sell the bonds at a premium, which means we could receive more than face value for those bonds to the extent that it appears the district will not need to supplement the bond issues in order to the bond issue funds with operating funds in order to do the $22.6 million worth of projects. We're still recommending keeping that $600,000 in the operating budget as a contingency in case some of the projects would go over budget for some reason, like we were talking about at Hickson, some of the issues, the challenges that are becoming apparent there as we go through the design process. It seems like the wise thing to do is to keep those operating funds in a reserve to supplement the bond funds, even if we sell the bonds at a premium, just to have a safety net for increased costs if some of the projects turn out to be more expensive than we initially estimated. We'd still be able to deliver everything that we promised to the community in the bond issue. But obviously, that's a game changer in that the increase through reassessment was a game changer. So we did the same kind of analysis on the expenditure side that we did on the revenue side. This also was included in your budget materials. The $62.9 million operating expenditure budget is a $1.2 million increase from the current revised budget. Primarily a reflection of salary adjustments, cost of living adjustments. That's offset somewhat by teacher retirement savings. And I had expected a lower number in my original projections because last year we had over 30 teachers retire/resign, and so that was a large number of teachers. I was not expecting a significant number this year. Maybe 8 or 10, which was a more normal level, but we've had more than that again this year. Not so much in the retirement, but also in the resignation. And when you combine those, especially resignations that happen in the middle or higher levels of the salary schedule, there's the opportunity for salary savings on those as well. And then we added the 6.2 FTE of new teachers for the positions that we talked about before. The new chief operating officer coming in, my work schedule being cut back, so those numbers reflect that. You might notice that in previous meetings we had talked about a 12% increase in health insurance costs. We were able to reduce that to 10%. We were advised, and we're 99.9% sure that the district will be in Tier 4 instead of Tier 5 this year for insurance. And we're hoping that trend continues into the future in terms of tier levels, but we're hoping that the cost trend gets more under control. When we used 12% before, if we had remained in Tier 5, that increase for Tier 5 districts this year would have been 16%. We had anticipated that the trust would make some adjustments to reduce that, the cost to the districts participating in the trust, but they made no changes in plan benefits and cost allocations, so there were no cost reductions implemented by the plan. So we're fortunate, and the timing was good for us to move from 5 to 4. Otherwise, we would have been looking at having to increase the budget instead of decrease the budget for medical insurance premiums. There's the retirement contribution impact of all of the salary benefits and staffing line changes. That's for the salary increases and also the additional staffing. General inflation allowance in some of the program budgets. We used a 2.2% inflation adjustment for supply budgets, service budgets, those kinds of things. And then included in this year's budget had been carryover of unspent facilities budgets and unspent building budgets. Those aren't an ongoing annual kind of a line item, so we reduced this year's budget for those kind of one-time items that have been included in this year's budget, and come up to a net total of $62.9 million, which then balances with the revenues. Wanted to illustrate, as we looked out to the deficits that we were looking at, so when we were looking at the budget summary and we saw, okay, we've got a $575,000 deficit, a $1 million deficit, those are, number one, as we said before, based on conservative budget assumptions, but even if they turn out to be accurate, the district has more than ample previous surplus reserves that it's accumulated in these past years, and that's what's really illustrated here you can see that when the blue line, which is revenues, exceeds the red line for operating expenditures, this difference represents a surplus. When they cross over, we start running a deficit, but you can see that the area of the deficit here in the future is much less than the surplus that we've built up over the past 4 years. And so we feel very comfortable that given a balanced budget this year, given that didn't even include a couple $100,000 a year in state funding that we'll get when we move to full funding, and given our conservative budget assumptions in the first place, that the district is not going to be in a position of needing to look for additional operating resources for at least the next 3 years, and probably even longer than that. So we're really in great shape, and as previously observed, those small and growing deficit projections are to be expected when one compounds conservative revenue and expenditure projections over time. That's just how the math works. And in truth, it keeps the district focused on getting the most out of every dollar every day, which is what this little illustration is for. It's like, okay, we're not making the pig scream, but sometimes I feel like we may get reported because he feels abused of how much we squeeze out of every dollar. So that budget management approach should help ensure a stable and sustainable financial path, or what one might call pulling a rabbit out of the hat in the district for the foreseeable future. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions, respond to any concerns.
I just want to thank you on behalf of the community for your work along with the rest of the staff in keeping the budget where it is, in accumulating revenues, and in managing that we have not had to have a tax levy increase. I think that's been very, very good for the community. I think it was evidenced by the election of Prop E recently, and just want to thank you for your work with that on behalf of the community, because I think it's huge.
Thank you. And there's a lot of credit to go around from the administrative team, having reasonable and realistic expectations, being cost conscious, everybody watching the financial results as they, both as they happen, doing the budget to actual comparisons, and then as we start to look forward as well, having reasonable expectations and realizing that as we make staffing commitments, you saw that one of the staffing commitments was a 1-year only commitment for the gifted at Hickson. We're thoughtful, we're adding those where necessary, but if it's not necessary to keep it there, we also have it programmed to pull back too, and it's those little things that make a big difference when you put them all together.
Other questions, comments? Other than yay, thank you, you're awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Public comment.
Anyone make public comment? Not yet. All right, in that case, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. John, all speak at the same
Make a
time.
motion to approve consent agenda items 9.02, 9.03, 9.04, 9.05, 9.06, 9.07, and 9.08.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, thank you, everybody.